In a bombshell investigation that's rattled both Ottawa and Washington, Canadian journalist Sam Cooper has uncovered what U.S. officials are calling one of the most consequential policing failures in recent history. At the heart of the scandal is a fentanyl superlab hidden in the mountains of British Columbia, capable of producing tens of millions of lethal doses, and a Canadian federal police force that repeatedly refused to cooperate with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Cooper's reporting reveals that the DEA provided intelligence to the RCMP in 2022, warning of shipments from China tied to a Health Canada licensed firm. Despite this, Canadian authorities refused to act until after the U.S. Treasury imposed sanctions a year later. Even then, the RCMP ran its own investigation, refusing to coordinate with U.S. agents who had developed the original case. In this exclusive interview, we're now joined by Sam Cooper to discuss what he uncovered. Sam, thank you so much for the time today.
Glad to be here.
Now, Sam, your findings allege the Canadian police stonewalled the U.S. government in their efforts to cooperatively disrupt a BC fentanyl lab network. And this is related to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs against Canada. First, what exactly was uncovered at this hidden super lab in British Columbia, and what transnational crime groups were behind this?
Well, it was a massive raid by the RCMP when they investigated. Ultimately, they found a half ton of hard narcotics, 54 kilograms of fentanyl, almost 400 kilograms of methamphetamine, 35 kilograms of cocaine. The weapons equally concerning, AR-15 submachine guns, explosives, body armor. So this is the type of weaponry consistent with Mexican cartel operations on Canadian soil. And the transnational crime groups involved are exactly the ones that the US government has been talking to Ottawa for years now about. And that is Chinese fentanyl precursor suppliers. These are Chinese triads that are active across the Western Hemisphere, especially very strong in money laundering and drug networks in Vancouver and Toronto. Mexican cartel style operations that have combined with, or rather come in over top of, brutal Canadian domestic gang networks that are receiving all kinds of drugs coming up from Mexico, including cocaine. So it's the worst of transnational crime operating, especially in Western Canada, in what is called these super fentanyl labs.
Now, the RCMP announced in October 2024 that they had dismantled this sophisticated fentanyl lab. But your investigation shows U.S. officials actually initiated the case years earlier, and Canadian police refused to cooperate. Can you walk us through that timeline?
Yes, I talked to a number of United States officials that said there was much more to the story. After the RCMP announced this stunning raid and dismantling of a lab in October 2024, I learned that the American DEA office in New Jersey, which is deeply involved in probing Chinese transnational crime networks involved in money laundering and fentanyl precursors, had come to the US Ottawa embassy in late 2022, warning that they had learned of a pre-shipment of fentanyl precursors coming from China into Vancouver, along with other chemicals from China believed to be bound for this Health Canada licensed lab in the Vancouver area. So the US government, in short, was asking the Canadians at a high level, will you work with us on this case? We believe it's very important. And they asked repeatedly after 2022, and were told in baldly, no, the RCMP would not investigate and would not cooperate. So turn to October 2023, the US government, under the Biden administration, takes a different approach. They announced Treasury sanctions against 28 entities, all in China, except for a Vancouver area businessman, and this lab are sanctioned as well. It's only after that, months after that, that Americans learned that Ottawa had started, that is, RCMP did their own investigation, and yet they would not share any information back with the American teams that had gave them the intelligence. And I was told simply from American officials, including Derek Maltz, the former acting administrator of the DA, this is unacceptable because the US government believes Canada and the United States are essentially being attacked with fentanyl by these foreign crime networks. And so there needs to be coordination and cooperation because people are dying across North America.
Well, and in your reporting, you had mentioned that the DEA acting administrator, Derek Maltz, called this case a major disaster. So, what specifically angered Washington about Canada's handling of the investigation?
I was told by Mr. Maltz without he didn't mince any words. In an on the record quote, he called the RCMP's conduct disgusting. He said that the way that Canada conducted business, withholding information from the DEA investigators who had significant ongoing investigations into these transnational networks. Remember, this involves not only British Columbia, but China, Mexico, many high level suspects. And the RCMP conducted their raid in northern British Columbia without even informing American investigators. And so this blindsided the Americans. I was told that this could have uh, some impact on the American investigations. And in a nutshell, this is just what the American officials, all the way up to President Trump now, are saying is a lack of coordination, a lack of cooperation, and quote, the Canada has failed to arrest traffickers, seize drugs, or coordinate with U.S. law enforcement. That's what President Trump cited to senior officials. And this story, I talked to some of those senior officials, some of them on the record.
And how does this superlab case tie directly into Donald Trump's decision just this summer to impose 35% tariffs on Canada?
President Trump's executive order cited exactly that statement. He said that senior officials have informed him since President Trump warned of these impending tariffs last fall that Canada hasn't changed. That is, Ottawa, the RCMP, have not improved and changed their efforts to work with the American government, who uh, clearly sees this as a Western Hemisphere national security threat. And yet, Ottawa has not worked on any of the what US officials call dated laws. And so President Trump said Canada has not assigned adequate resources and it's failing to interdict against these foreign networks. And so I was told President Trump's comments aligned exactly with the U.S. officials that explained in specific terms their concerns with the Falkland Lab, and not only the Falkland Lab, there are other labs and other botched investigations. In fact, a history of non-cooperation from the RCMP and American officials, I'm told, going back to the early 2000s.
Now, you mentioned U.S. sources told you that the Falkland breakdown was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of Ottawa refusing to share information or pursue major organized crime cases. What evidence did you uncover of the broader dysfunction?
The broader dysfunction involves cases that I've been informed of and done my own research into, where we see uh, tremendous shipments of cocaine coming from Mexico through the United States up into Canada, investigations from Vancouver to Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, in which the Canadian government and the RCMP has been asked for years to cooperate with the DEA and other agencies. And repeatedly, the RCMP throws up roadblocks, I'm told. It's seen as stonewalling. And, the core issue here I discovered and corroborated is that Canada has outdated laws that results in siloed national focused probes that don't work with the Americans to look at this really global problem. Lack of leadership in the RCMP and at senior levels in the Trudeau and Carney governments is cited, especially. And indeed, some of my sources in Canada and the United States point to questions about corruption within the RCMP and Canada Border Services Agency. In a nutshell, Canada has laws that Derek Malt said are weak, are outdated, porous borders, and as Derek Malt said, he can't mince his words. Canada has weak laws, and a lack of cooperation flows from that.
Now, we have about a minute left, but how does a fentanyl super lab like this one And the alleged failures to confront it put lives and national security at risk.
The US government, on the record now, is saying that the Chinese Communist Party intentionally is involved in sending fentanyl and fentanyl precursors into North America. The US government says that this has caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. And I've talked to a number of officials in Canada and the United States that say this is strategic activity by the Chinese Communist Party, working especially with Mexican cartels. And the objective for some is profit, and for the Chinese state is to weaken and destabilize the United States. So Canada has become a weak spot for these fentanyl super labs in rural areas of the Western Canada. Uh, and there are, concerns that fentanyl is being produced in Canada. Canada is now an exporting nation. This is causing deaths around the world, specifically in North America. And simply by Canada not cracking down on it, ultimately, Ottawa is saying we won't cooperate. We don't see this as a sort of warlike activity from China as you do in Washington. And there's just no urgency on Canada's part. So it's a national security threat. That's how it's seen in Washington.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.